Welcome, everyone. I'm Miguel Ocegueda, your host for today's program and Deputy Director of Programs for Headstrong, a national-facing mental health treatment practice committed to healing the wounds of war amongst veterans. It's our honor to have you with us for Meeting of the Minds, a series of discussions with influential leaders who themselves are committed to helping individuals find their way through life's journey. Today's discussion focuses on the healing power of loving kindness and compassion, and in particular, how one might build this capacity as a way to approach adverse childhood experiences. Over the next 30 minutes, we're going to explore topics that contribute to our understanding of how early childhood trauma can have lasting effects, especially among those veterans who serve, and how mindfulness can function as a powerful tool to finding deeper meaning and understanding. I am pleased today that we are joined by Sharon Salzberg, a world-renowned thought leader known for her clarity of mind and depth of practice. It is my honor. Sharon, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me.
So to begin, I thought maybe you could start us off with a grounding meditation before we take a moment to dive into some of these topics that we've outlined.
Sure. Why don't we practice together just for a couple of minutes? And if you could just sit comfortably, lying down is fine as well. You can close your eyes or not, however you feel most at ease. And we'll start just by listening to sound, whether it's the sound of my voice or other sounds. It's a way of relaxing deep inside. And unless you're responsible for responding to the sound, you can just let it wash through you. Some sounds we like, some we don't. But we also don't have to chase after them, to hold on or push away. And bring your attention to the feeling of your body sitting. You can feel the earth supporting you. You can feel space touching you. Usually we think about touching space and we think about like lifting up our finger and poking it in the air. But space is already touching us. Bring your attention to your hands. See if you can make the shift from the more conceptual level, like our fingers, to the world of direct sensation. Picking up pulsing, throbbing, warmth, coolness, whatever it might be. This is also the world of constant change. You don't have to name these things, but feel them. And then if it works for you, bring your attention to the feeling of your breath, just the normal, natural breath, wherever you feel it most distinctly. The nostrils, the chest, or the abdomen. For some people, it doesn't work for physical reasons, emotional reasons, and that's fine. Then some other sensation that's already happening in your body, like your hand touching your leg or whatever it might be, something easy to find. Let's say it's the breath. You bring your attention there. See if you can feel just one breath. You don't have to worry about what's already gone by. You don't have to lean forward for even the very next breath. It's just this one. And when I was first practicing and I was very frightened, I was very kind of hypervigilant, I used to say to myself, you're breathing anyway. All you need to do is feel it. Because it was so hard to be with just one breath without kind of leaning forward for the next 50. So I'd say, settle back. You're breathing anyway. Let the breath come to you. If your mind slips off, you get distracted, you fall asleep, anything is fine, truly. When you realize that, see if you can let go gently and with some kindness toward yourself, come back to the breath or come back to that sensation that's your primary object. And when you feel ready, you can open your eyes or lift your gaze, and we'll end the meditation.
Thank you for that, Sharon. So it's interesting, a lot of, especially amongst veteran hypervigilance, is one of those common sort of symptoms, often associated with experience either in childhood trauma or from their service. And so, just this in that brief introduction, being able to train the mind to come back to a certain sensation that is grounded in the present, is really kind of the arc of what it is that we do in therapy in session. So it's a nice adjunct to be able to do this and immediately feel the effects. So thank you for that. You recently participated in a series titled the Collective Trauma Series, in which you focused your discussion around caring for those who care for others. And I'm taking great freedom in categorizing many of the veterans across the country in that particular group, because while it's true that many of our veterans decide to join for a variety of reasons, I think that many of us serve because within us there is a calling or an innate drive to help others. But it's that same drive and the calling that often puts us at odds when with ourselves when we need to turn that compassion inwards. Can you speak about the trainability and the power of compassion and loving kindness, and how that might apply to veterans in particular?
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, there are, I don't know, it's a funny word. We call them caregivers. I always think it doesn't evoke the power really of that particular relationship. But I have worked a lot with caregivers, say international humanitarian aid workers, people who work in the refugee camps, or in terms of the military, chaplains, people like that. Uh, and the military itself, I think you're right. There's a kind of relatedness to others and a feeling of wanting to help, and not just vaguely wanting to help, but taking action, actually moving, changing one's life in order to actualize that and make it real. And what I've seen is that in all the people I've worked with, not only in them but in myself as well, there's a tremendous tendency to go all out for others, and a great difficulty in doing sometimes the smallest thing for oneself. It's a certain kind of orientation, and that's where we feel most authentic, and we feel most genuine. And yet the truth is, just the reality is, that no one can go on without replenishing, without some
Mm-hmm.
rest, which is my favorite word these days, just to get some rest, to be able to then meet adversity or challenge. We can't actually do it when we're running on empty. And so it's actually very pragmatic advice. And it's very hard to take, to have loving kindness or compassion for ourselves feels like laziness or self-indulgence, or losing sight of our commitments, what we really feel our lives are about. And yet I think it's almost like the most fundamental reality is that we have to understand energy and the conservation of energy and resilience, and being able to start over, and especially in terms of trauma. I don't remember who said it, but I think my favorite definition of a traumatic response is a normal response to an abnormal situation.
Mm-hmm.
So to remove any sense of stigma or pathology from it at all, and to understand that there's many things, and I'm sure we'll talk about them. Maybe there's an imbalance, or maybe there's the replication of old patterns that were once useful that are not maybe
Mm-hmm.
so relevant right now. But in any case, we need to have some spaciousness in our being to deal with them. We need to have flexibility. And a lot of that comes down to energy and actual kindness to ourselves. Something I've seen in teaching meditation for these many years. As my friends say, I've been teaching long before it became cool. I've been teaching meditation since 1974. Is that, there's such a common perception of something like compassion, especially self-compassion, as being weak or
Mm-hmm.
um, ineffectual. And actually, it's a powerful source of resilience and being effective, and being able to begin again, and lessons learned, move on in a different direction, and all the things we actually want. So I think we have to kind of really explore it and see that it's not weak at all.
Yeah, you bring up a great point, which is another topic that's often at a forefront in our minds at Headstrong is the stigma often associated with seeking care and asking for help. There was a series or someone mentioned buying your book about loving kindness and having to hide it in their newspaper while they're reading it on the subway because for them there was for them it was a sign of weakness. And so I think exactly what you said, being able to, when you think about it in terms of energy, being able to present this in a way that just makes sense, but then again, is serving a way for us to continue to helping others. I think that's the way we try to position mental health in general, and it's great to hear that this is a capacity that again it's innate in us, and we have to try to just do our best to find ways that help us replenish this. In your book, The Art of Mindful Connection, you talk about love as not simply being a feeling, but as an ability and a capacity. And I'd like to take a moment to discuss the challenges that come to those who've grown up facing adversity early in life, long before military service, often in early childhood or adolescence, in their own homes, within their own families, or amongst close friends. The type of adversity that introduces challenges to building this innate capacity to love oneself. Could we at this point discuss the importance of love and its power to heal?
Well, of course, love is such a complicated word, isn't it? Like, what do we mean by love? I tend to use it. I try to use it as a profound sense of connection and presence, and it's not so conditional. Like, I will love myself as long as I never make a mistake. It's like we know the breakability and the fragility of that state, and I will love others as long as they are under my control or whatever, as long as they're perfect, as long as they never change, and so it's such a big setup for disappointment and bitterness and so on. So avoiding kind of the common ideas of love, or the conventional ideas of love, I think of it as this profound sense of connection. And I think it's something that in many walks of life, we get intuitive hits on. Like if I go into a business or an organization to teach, I always ask, how many other people need to be doing their job well for you to do your job well? Because really, we live in an interdependent universe, and we can see that, if we actually pay attention. So it's that understanding of connection, and that everybody, in a sense, wants to be happy. Everybody may define happiness differently or think there's a different way to get there, but we all basically want a sense of belonging, of having a sense of being at home somewhere in his
Hmm.
body and his mind with one another on this planet. And that's love is the vehicle for that, for our own movement toward that sense of belonging and for ways of relating to others. And usually we think of love as, first of all, romance, and it's very, it's like a commodity, like when I first I was writing that book, Real Love, The Art of Mindful Connection. Uh, One publisher said to me, oh, the love market is saturated, by which she meant the how to find a partner market, or how to leave a partner market, or how to live with a partner market is saturated. But I didn't mean that at all. And I do like that idea. My goddaughter actually had a tiny little part in a movie called Dan in Real Life, which came out maybe, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago. And there's a character in the movie who said, love is not a feeling, it's an ability. Love is not a feeling, it's an ability. And because I'm a good godmother, I saw that movie many times. And then I really, took in that line, and I liked it quite a lot. And of course, love is a feeling as well. But I really began to ponder love as an ability, because I realized that in the ordinary sense of love, it's totally in the hands of someone else. Like it's like a
Hmm.
package. And I would get this image of like the UPS person standing on my doorstep holding this package of love,
Hmm.
looking down at the address and saying, no, I think I'll go somewhere else. I'm going like, wait a minute. then I have nothing. Then I'm like totally bereft. But if it's
Right.
an ability, if it's a capacity inside me, it's mine. Other people
Right.
may ignite it or inspire it or threaten it, but
Mm.
basically it's within me. And so it's both a very empowering concept, and it's also about responsibility. It's like if I want love to be in a particular conversation, maybe I have to be the one to bring it in, things like
Mm.
that.
Yeah, I mean, and so when I think about, how that relates to childhood trauma, so being at such an early age, and having the belief that love is something that is not for you, or is that it, because people are not giving it to you, we don't develop this capacity to learn love for ourselves. And this is something that's carried on. I think we develop good ways at masking, or in some ways ignoring the actual need to experience love. And so this carries forward into
Mhm.
their adult lives and often having detrimental effects. Which leads me to my next topic. You've said that it's possible to metabolize grief in ways that don't produce hostility towards the self, but that nourish our lives, our families, and our communities, and that they offer lessons for moral and spiritual growth. And you've also said that we also long for permanence, but that everything in the known universe is transient. As much as we want to be able to control it or want permanence, it is transient, and that's a fight. That's a fact that we often fight with, that we grapple with. So, keeping these two ideas in mind, I'd like to spend some time discussing this interesting paradigm, one that exists between the ability to metabolize grief in ways that don't produce hostility inwardly towards the self, and the fact that we long for permanence, and in this case, permanence of beliefs that often don't serve our overall well being. Clinically, they're sometimes referred to as schemas or core beliefs that have been developed as a result of early childhood trauma and the accompanying distortions that we use, or rather the lenses of the world that we use to see that reinforce these core beliefs. So, could you talk about your experiences with this type of internal struggle, and how one might begin to detach themselves from these core beliefs in some ways that help people get through really adverse conditions as children, but aren't serving them well in their adult life?
Yeah, I think that the last thing you said is a key element of it is being able to see the patterns, the conditioning, the habits of mind that we have without a lot of judgment about it. Like these things often do serve us well, and it's only as we mature and have other perspectives and other tools that we can look at some of them and think, well, like maybe not anymore. But that doesn't mean they won't come up. So the whole role of mindfulness is basically to see what's coming up as it's coming up, and then having some choice about whether we're gonna carry it out or let go of it. So I had a lot of adverse childhood experiences. I had a very traumatic childhood. I wrote a book called Faith, Trusting Your Own Deepest Experience, about faith in oneself. And and it's about my own story. So in writing it, I looked at my life a lot and I realized that I went to college at the age of 16, being a product of the New York City public school system, which like to have people skip grades. And by the time I was 16, I'd lived in 5 different family configurations, each of which had ended by somebody dying or some, terribly traumatic loss. My parents divorced when I was 4, and I lived with my mother who died when I was 9. And then I went, and so it
Mm.
was like a whole series of things. And I certainly identify with that idea of schemas, being on the outside, being very different, looking in at everyone else who has a life,
Mm.
as life is supposed to look like, but not
Mm.
me. Feeling incapable, wondering if anyone would ever love me.
Mm.
I recognize all of those, and I really do credit, uh, at least in part, my meditation practice for giving me the tools for being able to identify thoughts as thoughts, to see them not after I've like withdrawn, or
Mm.
said no, or because I feel like I'm not capable, I'm not going to do that. Uh, but before when the urge is arising, so it is a very empowering stance to be able to see, oh yeah, this is a habitual tendency.
Mm,
Um, and that's part of why it was so extraordinary for me to think of love as a capacity, because as a capacity, it's never destroyed. It may
mm,
be covered over, it may be hard to find, it may be hard to trust. Usually is very hard to trust, but it's there. No matter what we go through, it's not destroyed as a potential, as a possibility. And I really believe that, and I discovered that. I think even in the worst circumstances, when you feel most overcome by thoughts and feelings from the past, that are kind of residual, there's some sense that there's love in this universe.
mm,
And sometimes it's obviously in a therapeutic relationship. We get confidence in that, or um, friendship, comradeship, or inspiration, art, music, something like that, or nature, or just learning to relate to ourselves differently.
mm. Sharon, thank you. I mean, and so for me, we share a similarities here in being products of maybe childhood and adverse homes. And so I would say that, for me, it was always the rather than withdrawing, but the denial of these experiences. But as someone famously said, even memories and feelings are subject to the weight of gravity. As much as you throw them up in the air with all your might, they eventually come back down, and often with greater force because they're coming and traveling at such great speed. So, having mindfulness as a way to develop this, I think you said it best, a, a different view of ourselves, often being grateful and expressing gratitude for having gone through those experiences, but being aware that we're no longer there, I think is a great touch point. So it brings me to this final sort of place for us to also discuss. In a quote I personally reference, you say it's never too late to turn on the light. Your ability to break an unhealthy habit or turn off an old tape doesn't depend on how long it's been running. A shift in perspective doesn't depend on how long you've held on to the old view. When you flip the switch in that attic, it doesn't matter whether it's been dark for 10 minutes, 10 years, or 10 decades. The light still illuminates the room and banishes the murkiness, letting you see the things you couldn't see before. It's never too late to take a moment to look. If you had to select key takeaways about mindfulness from our discussion, what are they?
I think that going back to your question about change, it's like change also serves us. Like there's a part of change, of course, that's loss or poignancy or not being able to hold on. And there's a part of change that's about beginnings, and not being stuck, and not being kind of stuck in a rut, and realizing that it's almost like we don't recognize it until we have like one foot in the ditch, but we can recognize it then before we've fallen in.
Right,
And,
right.
we need to forgive ourselves for that and not blame ourselves like, oh, I was so close, or I started getting overwhelmed, or I did get overwhelmed. And we have to realize that maybe we got overwhelmed, but it's not lasting as long,
Hmm.
because we have tools and we come back sooner, and it feels more comfortable to be in a state of balance, which is another way of saying mindfulness is balance. I think my favorite definition of mindfulness actually came from this article in the New York Times, like many years ago, about a pilot program, one of the very early programs bringing mindfulness into the classroom. And it was a fourth grade classroom in California. And they asked this kid who's in fourth grade, so let's say 9 or 10 years old, they said, what is mindfulness? What is mindfulness? And he said, mindfulness means not hitting someone in the mouth. That's what mindfulness means. And I thought that is a great definition. Because what does it imply? It implies we're so in touch. We can feel we're getting angry as we're starting to get angry,
Hmm.
not after we've acted in some way. And it also implies a certain balanced relationship to the anger, which is like the skills. It's a training in mindfulness. If we get completely consumed and overwhelmed by the feeling, we'll probably hit a lot of people in the mouth because life can be very frustrating. But if we hate what we feel and we're ashamed of it and we try to deny it, and we try to repress it, we get tighter and tighter and tighter till we explode. So we say mindfulness is like a place in the middle. We can connect to what's going on. We can be really in touch with it, but there's some space. And in that space, we are empowered. We do have a choice. Like I like to think of that kid thinking, hit someone in the mouth last week. Didn't work out that well. Let me try this, So like creativity can arise and options we hadn't seen before when we were stuck might arise. So it really kind of opens up our world.
Oh, thank you, Sharon. For me, it's really about you mentioning the space between sort of actions, thoughts, and feelings, and it's in this place where veterans often struggle to find a sense of self because we've been so conditioned either to be selfless or in some cases denying our needs that are innate to each and every one of us. So thank you for pointing those things out for us. At Headstrong, we believe it's only through becoming vulnerable that we're able to begin the process of healing. We also recognize that engaging leaders like you is integral to refining and growing our own process and work in this realm. So thank you for your openness and generosity. We very much appreciated your participation in the Meeting of the Mind series, but more importantly, thank you for your contribution and my own sort of journey through healing. That often, I reflect and use your definitions of equanimity and peace and balance as a way to ground myself. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much. And thank you for all your work.